Some people still believe that the use of tools for pounding, digging, scraping and cutting is what distinguishes humans from apes. Actually, there is considerable evidence by Washburn in 1960 that the use of such hand tools and other devices existed with pre-human primates almost 1 million years ago. Perhaps the attitude was that 1 million years of evolutionary experience would produce tools and devices uniquely adapted for human use.
The design study set out to question the ergonomic practicality of traditional hand tools, specifically gardening hand tools. There was some doubt that these age-old devices were the best shape for the intended task.
Digging fork, border or lady's fork, mock fork.
A detailed investigation began, starting with a close study of a professional gardener at work with her tools. This gave the project realistic insight into the problems associated with various tools of the trade.
The other thing you use Dutch hoe for is a stabbing movement.
Each tool was demonstrated by the gardener in use, observed by myself, thereby receiving first-hand background knowledge of this area.
Isn't fixed properly on the shaft anyway. That could probably be curable.
Yeah, sure.
Over this one should get down. Get your shoulders behind it and put all your weight on it. That way you have a nice, smooth, clean edge.
Yeah.
It was decided that the spade and fork were particular tools that would benefit from such a study.
You're taking a pot-sized turf.
In addition, these two devices are the most commonly used items in the garden.
Level strip of turf. It's just lifted up. It's terrific.
Various users of the spade and fork were initially observed in action to ascertain how the general public handled an existing spade and fork.
That's very good. Great.
It was interesting to see how old and young, men and women, all tried to dig or fork with an existing product.
As she does, I want to put my foot there instead of there.
The next phase in the investigation was to select 3 professional gardeners to assist in a detailed observation of digging with a conventional fork and spade. The point of this exercise was to study in detail the actions of the 3 gardeners. A predominant feature in their action was the fact that the wrist was subjected to repeated bending throughout the digging process. This was particularly interesting because many gardeners interviewed complained of arthritic conditions in the limbs, particularly in the hands and the wrist. Having observed these gardeners, it was also found that the hands had to be twisted in order to grip the hilt or the handle of the spade. This was found to be a most uncomfortable position for the wrist. It became apparent that a major problem with existing spades and forks lay in the design of the shafts, which forced the user to bend his hand and wrist. Progressing from the video observation, thoughts were put down in sketch form on possible remedies to these problems. The first ideas conceived were based on the theory that it would be more practical to bend the shaft rather than the wrist. The bends in the shaft on these initial ideas were placed in areas that had caused the wrist to bend when gripped. From here on, the project got exciting. Initial doubts expressed about the existing shape of the shaft were well founded. The doubt was now proven fact. Theoretically, this principle of bending the shaft would take stress off the wrist. Now was the time to put the theory into practice. The basic idea of a bent shaft was developed through a series of working prototypes. Each prototype was tested on a selection of users in order to produce the most effective shaft for the purpose. The next phase was when the 3 professional gardeners field tested the prototype shaft with an existing blade attached. The range of gardeners' heights was between 6'5" and 4'3". Initially, the gardeners were a little taken back by the unconventional shape, but once they tried it out and dug, all 3 responded very naturally and used it with great ease. It was particularly interesting to see that even the very tallest and shortest of the gardeners were coping well with the prototype. By viewing the 2 videos of these field trials, considerable improvement in body posture could be discerned in the use of the prototype. In particular, the amount the wrist had to bend for certain actions in the digging sequence.
This diagram shows some of the positions the wrist can get into. As you see here, the dorsiflexion position is where the palm is up. Neutral position is the best position the hand can get into, or rather the wrist. And the palmar flexion is where the palm is pointing downwards. Then on the other plane, the neutral position is like so. And then we've got radial deviation, is that way, and then we've got ulnar deviation, which is that way.
When all 3 gardeners were questioned after the field test, some interesting suggestions were given. Firstly, in wet conditions, the hand tended to slip down the steel shaft, indicating that the shaft would benefit from some type of grip surface. There was also a tendency for the hand to slip off the top of the shaft. This could be alleviated by a bung of some type, and maybe the bung could have a hole in it to enable the spade to be hung up in the garden shed.
feels awful. It's naturally, it feels natural to start doing like that.
The latest prototype has therefore a non-slip bung at the top of the shaft with a nylon cord attached. The grip marks have been applied to the shaft at even intervals. These could be knurled onto the shaft or could be jet sandblasted on. The whole shaft could then be dip coated in the appropriate plastic. This would give a slight cushioning effect when gripped and would also be less cold to the touch than bare steel. It would also offer a change of colour. The project is now at a stage when it is ready to be developed with a manufacturer for production. The work done to date is only the beginning. Much work is still needed. The next stage would be to test the current prototype on the market and get some quantitative market feedback. A batch production of say 50 units could be sufficient for this stage.